is Encore.
Cool.
The stories behind the songs.
Thank you.
Here's iHeartRadio's Miles Galloway.
Boom, 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 boom. Yes, hey, I'm Miles Galloway. You know, we've covered some amazing rock songs over the course of this podcast. Nickelback's Photograph, Kings of Leon's Use Somebody, and Sum 41's Fat Lip, just to name a few. But let's start this episode off with a little bit of homework, shall we? Quickly, don't think too hard, but is there a more immediately recognizable rock riff of the last 25 years than the White Stripes' Seven Nation Army? Not so much a song owned by a band anymore, and more of a tour de force piece of performance art for passionate sporting event goers worldwide to make their own. Seven Nation Army has become a part of the public consciousness in ways that very few songs since the turn of the century have managed to. 7 little notes, and a band who spent a lot of their existence arguably trying to not follow trends and gain worldwide celebrity status. It doesn't really seem like the recipe for success on paper. This is the story of the White Stripes' 2003 classic, Seven Nation Army. By 2003, the lore of the White Stripes had been firmly established. A purported brother-sister duo band that had actually turned out to be ex-husband and wife. The Whites, Jack and Meg, had been straddling the line between mainstream and indie rock and roll brought on by the garage rock revival of the early 2000s, and committing to the bit with their white, red and black aesthetic since the late 90s. Their third album, White Blood Cells, was a resounding critical success, with fans and music writers heralding them as the true saviors of rock and roll. The New York Times went as far as to credit them as being responsible for making rock again, while Rolling Stone praised Jack's Delta Roadhouse fantasies, Detroit garage rock razzle and busted love lyricism, and Meg's toy thunder drumming. Songs like Fell in Love with a Girl and Dead Leaves in the Dirty Ground were just noisy enough to feel counterculture, innocent enough to appeal to a more pop-leaning audience, and bluesy enough to inspire glory and nostalgia with a classic rock dad crowd. As good as White Blood Cells was, and as truly cool as the White Stripes would become to a legion of future vinyl collectors, you also could be forgiven if you didn't jump on the Jack and Meg bandwagon with both feet. Not to sound overly negative or anything, after all, this was almost 25 years ago, wow, but as authentic as the music felt, it was also a little gimmicky and twee. And the brother-sister tall tale the band was spinning was certainly a great pre-internet meme to impress people with at parties, but, you know, it was kind of weird, and what's the point exactly? Why are we pretending you're brother and sister? Can't you just give us the truth? To be fair, Jack White did address these criticisms pretty bluntly in 2003, and it was hard to argue. He told The Guardian, "There was a lack of information coming from us, but a lot of need for copy. The one thing the fucking media hates is not being able to dissect someone so that every little part of their existence can be written as a soundbite in a paragraph. What they want is, Jack White, 26 years old, likes race cars and soccer, grew up in the inner city of Detroit and is now top of the world. Can't stand chocolate ice cream. Everyone wants the inside scoop. No, that's not what you need to know about. That's got nothing to do with the music we make. What we create, you can talk about. What the songs are, how we present them live, and what the aesthetic is. Art-wise, to what we're creating. It's the same thing as asking Michelangelo, what kind of shoes do you wear? It doesn't really have anything to do with his painting. Anyway, all this is to say that while they may have been unquestionably talented critical darlings when breaking through in 2002, I don't think many people expected the White Stripes to come out of the gate in 2003 with, you know, the biggest song ever. But on one cold day in February 2003, there was an elephant in the room that simply couldn't be denied. Always wants to go against the grain, the majority of the White Stripes' fourth studio album, Elephant, was recorded in April 2002 at London's modest Toe Rag Studio. As legend has it, the album was recorded exclusively on antiquated and busted-up recording equipment, with none of the recording gear used being manufactured after 1963. In fact, the album's liner notes proudly declare no computers were used during the writing, recording, mixing, or mastering of this record. Yeah, that's how we make this podcast. Jack would tell George Stroumboulopoulos the record was also incredibly cheap to make.
We're just done with the idea this record was done
in a really affordable way in a lot of ways, wasn't it? They're just repeating my question, but for everybody out there.
It was. It was about 5,000 pounds, I think. We were in England, so about 5,000 pounds. We did it in 10 days. I want to know what words they're saying.
The idea that you can bring a record back to something that you feel comfortable with, maybe, a rawer sound, a more honest sound, was that the intent?
Yeah, always, every time. I mean, we did like White Blood Cells, we did it in 3 days, and we did Elephant in 10 days, I think, and we did, just to keep it so you don't overthink it, overproduce it, record on too many tracks. I think that should be a more popular thing.
I'm sure I don't need to tell you this, but this wasn't done because the band couldn't afford better gear or weren't being trusted by their label to spend a big shiny budget on all the best tech. Meg and Jack simply wanted it this way. They wanted to push the limits of the sound of music they could make with just the two of them, an 8-track recorder. As Jack would tell George Stroumboulopoulos for much, his philosophy was as follows.
It just seems like if you come out with a band and you use all electronic equipment and you record digitally and you have a drum machine and 50 samples and somebody rapping or whatever it is, all of a sudden it's cutting edge music. I think anyone that really feels that they're doing something original is really fooling themselves. You shouldn't even want to, in one sense. One sense, you should be wanting to uphold the tradition of music and join the tradition of music and respect your elders, respect the people that came before you and honor the songwriters and people who really broke ground and paid their dues before, coming out with this brand new album recorded, on a digital bath towel or whatever, in the year 2030. I don't know.
What's incredible is that if you really want to be different, without trying to be different, take away the instruments. It's a lot easier for people to recognize when you make a mistake.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the mistakes are the best part too. I mean, there's not enough mistakes. Everyone records albums now and they fix them on computer and they make them perfectly in time. Everything is completely edited on computer and the drums line up perfectly to this perfect metronome, digital metronome, which takes all the soul out of music at all, and they make it sound like it's completely generated by a machine, not by a human being.
The White Stripes were intrinsically tied to simplicity in rock and roll. Guitars, drums, vocals, no more, no less. Something to keep the tempo, something to carry the tune, and vocals to tie it all together. Jack would tell The Guardian, somebody else there would bring this fourth component, a bassist or a keyboard player, for example. And if you're going to have 4 components, you might as well have 20, Jack would also expand on these thoughts to much.
I was talking to a guy, Matt Johnson from Fat Possum Records in Oxford, and he said that the bass ruined the blues because before it was just a guy and a guitar.
Yeah, that's true. I think that's a real true statement. Because I think once bass got added, then it was, let's add a second guitar. Let's add a horn section. And then it was progressive rock, for 15 years. And then the simplicity had all been gone, and the heartfelt notion had been gone. So it feels like really fake, that kind of music, because it's just so orchestrated, and almost to the point where they were becoming rock and roll composers, like in a classical style.
All of a sudden they become Yes.
Yeah. It's like trouble. Some virtuosity on an instrument, Sometimes it just leaves a bad taste in your mouth, I'd rather hear someone hit one note really well rather than hit 300 notes 100 miles an hour.
Oh, okay, I get it. It's all making sense now. 2 band members, 3 colours, 3 instruments, including vocals, no keyboards, no computers, and certainly no bass guitar. It's just not necessary. White Blood Cells saved rock and roll, and there wasn't a bass lick to be found on that album. With that in mind, let me cue up my brand new copy of Elephant. Press play, and... Wait, is that a bass guitar starting the album off with the very first note? Excuse my Britishness, but Jack, mate, are you taking the piss? Well, not exactly. Let me explain. On first listen, or really any listen of Seven Nation Army, track 1 off of Elephant, you would be forgiven for assuming that the instrument that you hear right off the top is a bass guitar. After all, it sounds like a bass guitar. Your ears would be deceiving you, however, because although Jack White swore off the bass as an instrument at the time, he didn't say that he swore off the bass as a sound. In a classic case of White Stripesian things are not what they seem, Jack took his semi-acoustic K-hollow body guitar and plugged it into a Digitech whammy pedal, which creates a pitch shift effect on connected instruments. By hitting the pedal, White simply shifted the pitch by an octave on the notes he was playing, and for all intents and purposes, the guitar became a bass. Originally conceived as a bit of noodling at a soundcheck in Australia in 2002, Jack bounced the idea for the opening riff off of Meg White and record label employee Ben Swank. Ben, for what it's worth, was not so impressed. Jack told George,
Wasn't it a song the riff came out of a sound check in Australia or something?
Yeah, that's right. That's
You know?
right. Yeah, I remember my friend Ben. He's in a band called the Soledad Brothers. He was with us, and he came up. He was walking by, and I said, "Hey Ben, listen to this riff." And I played it for him, and he goes, "Eh."
White stuck to his guns, however, and although he debated holding on to it as a song he'd release if he ever had the chance to record a James Bond theme, he would, by the way, 2008's Alicia Keys collab Another Way to Die, the White Stripes brought the song to Toe Rag Studios in 2002, and White's little experiment of a song without a chorus was recorded in full. Originally titled Seven Nation Army as a lyricless working title, Jack harkened back to his childhood for the title's inspiration. Quite simply, it's what he used to call the Salvation Army before he could properly pronounce the words. Eventually, the working title became the real title, and the lyrics tell the tale of Jack and Meg fighting back against the industry of fame, gossip blogs and magazines, interested more in their private lives than the art they create. With Meg White banging on the drums in her signature heavy-handed hypnotic style, the song tells the tale of self-righteous paranoia and reaching the point of no return with your back up against the wall. Released on February 17th, 2003, the primal us versus them nature of Seven Nation Army gave the song a sort of universal appeal. It was infinitely catchy, radio-ready despite the lack of chorus, and would quickly become their biggest song ever, charting on the Billboard Hot 100 and hitting number 1 on US alternative airplay. Seven Nation Army would propel Elephant to platinum status in the US before year's end, and would eventually win the band a Grammy Award for Best Rock Song, a crowning achievement for a band who stuck so rigidly to their artistic principles. With many songs, that's where this story would end. The White Stripes became a household name off the back of Seven Nation Army, released a few more records to similar critical and commercial acclaim, and just like they'd always said they would, called it quits by 2011 before the dynamics of the band got stale. But with Seven Nation Army, something magical was bubbling under the surface soon after it was released to the world, and the song would take on an entire life of its own.
For you guys, you're back, you have a new record and such. Unlike a lot of bands, this one didn't cost you very much, did it? No, it's
What
not.
are they singing? What are they singing?
There's a soccer game going on behind
it's
us.
a soccer
chant.
What were you saying? I'm sorry.
We're just talking about the idea.
On October 22nd, 2003, travelling supporters of Belgium's Club Bruges were preparing for their Champions League match against AC Milan at the legendary San Siro Stadium in a nearby bar. Seven Nation Army wasn't even 5 months old in Italy and had completed most of its charting success back home in the USA when the song made its way across the pub's sound system. By all metrics, it certainly wasn't the smash hit in Europe that we think it to be now. Filled with booze and low expectations, the Bruges faithful had Jack White's earworm firmly planted in their brains as they made their way to the stadium, singing the iconic 7 notes over and over as their battle cry of choice. The volume of the chants were suddenly turned up to 11 when their Peruvian striker Andres Mendoza shocked Milan in the 33rd minute with a game-winning goal. Milan were the heavy favourites in the game, so the chants across the stadium represented defiance as much as they did celebration. They wanted the sounds of Seven Nation Army to haunt the Italians' dreams. Assumedly seen as a bit of a good luck charm, Bruges fans adopted the chant soon after for domestic home games, with the club itself designating Seven Nation Army as its goal music. 3 years later, in a new European competition, Italian team Roma FC came to Belgium for a match against Club Bruges, and while there's certainly no love lost between Roma and Milan domestically, when Roma beat Bruges 2-1, they gave Bruges a little taste of their own medicine, chanting, "Po, po, 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 po," back at them. I had never heard the song before we stepped on the field in Bruges, Roma captain told a Dutch newspaper. Since then, I can't get the po, 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 po out of my head. It sounded fantastic, and the crowd was immediately totally into it. I quickly went out and bought one of the band's albums. With Totti's ringing endorsement, Italian fans everywhere adopted the song as their own, and pom 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 song fever had taken over across the country. It's kind of incredible to note that while the chant is Seven Nation Army at its core, the spread of the song as a chant itself transcended its origins, with many footy fans not knowing or caring about the quirky indie rockers from Detroit. This pre-social media virality worked quickly. The clip I played earlier of the fans chanting the song at Much with Strombo That was less than a month after the original Milan incident. There was no YouTube, no TikTok, or Instagram to share clips around with. It was just something fans felt in their gut, something they could latch onto and become part of with such ease. Seven Nation Army was fully co-opted by the Italian national team in June of 2006, just in time for the World Cup, with fans serenading Totti against Ghana in the group stage. On the final night of the tournament, when Zinedine Zidane's chaotic headbutt on Marco Materazzi became the stuff of folklore, so did Seven Nation Army, exploding on the streets of Italy when the team ultimately beat France for the World Cup on July 9th. 2 days later, in what must have felt like a sort of fever dream, Materazzi and Alessandro Del Piero returned to the San Siro in Milan to perform the song with the Rolling Stones, replacing the lyricless chant with "We are the champions," in Italian, of course. By now, with his song truly a global phenomenon, news got back to Jack White. "I am so honoured that the Italians have adopted this song as their own," White said. "Nothing is more beautiful than when people embrace a melody and allow it to enter the pantheon of folk music." But it didn't stop there. Football fans across Europe quickly adopted their own renditions at the European Championships in 2008, 2012 and 2016, and it became the official walkout song for all teams at the 2018 FIFA World Cup. With Europe conquered, Seven Nation Army went worldwide, being used across all sports. Miami Heat used it in basketball, Baltimore Ravens used it in NFL, college sports teams can't get enough of it, and fans even chant it at WWE events.
Well, it is the night after WrestleMania. Bizarro crowd.
Like Barcelona against Real Madrid.
Useful in its simplest pom 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 form, supporter groups also often take syllabic inspirations from their team names or star players, shoehorning them into the iconic cadence. Here in Toronto, for example, we've adopted it as well. Now completely ingrained in the fabric of music, critics have given Seven Nation Army the highest of praise. Rolling Stone described it as the best riff of the 2000s and ranked it number 36 of the best songs of all time. The New Yorker even went as far to say that the opening riff might be the second best known guitar phrase in all of popular music, after Rolling Stone's Satisfaction. None of this is lost on Jack White, telling Conan O'Brien that it really isn't his song anymore, and he likes it that way.
I remember sitting with you in Dodger Stadium, and they start to go, doom, 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 doom. And you're just sitting there, and I'm like, this has become an anthem that is ubiquitous across the globe. And everyone knows how it goes. And it's one of the most famous, licks, riffs, tunes ever. And I was just sitting with you going like, oh, right, this is you. I think I started to make up lyrics about money's coming in your pocket. And you're like, I am making some money. But it reminded me like how fucking freaky that must be.
It's strange, yeah. My mother was a huge fan of the movie Yankee Doodle Dandy.
Yeah, me too. I love that movie.
I still love it to this day. And so he's obviously playing the character George M. Cohan, and who had written the big World War I song Over There. And at the last scene in the movie, I think he walks out of the White House, and there's a parade of soldiers singing Over There, and he's walking with them. Yeah, and
yep.
We've got a soldier next to him. James Cagney says, "What's the matter, old timer? You don't know this song?"
Yeah,
and
he wrote it.
Yeah, and he wrote it, and I think of that every time I hear that Seven Nation Army on a sports broadcast or something on TV. It has the same feeling that it's not mine anymore. I mean, it becomes folk music when things like that happen. It becomes something that the more people don't know where it came from, the happier I am. The more it just becomes ubiquitous. And I'm sure many people are chanting the melody have no idea what the song is or where it came from or why or whatever. It doesn't matter anymore. And that's just amazing.
Right. And and it's funny because over time you will even lose your connection to where you were sitting when you came up with that.
Oh, it's
you know
strange.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Or you guys probably banged that out and said
so quickly.
We
We filmed it.
Let's go get a donut now. And that's the level of intensity,
We filmed that recording of that record a bunch, and I know that song was just filmed for a minute because it was not considered anything interesting at that moment. It was just other things we were working on we thought were way more interesting. And
Sure, a bit of a humble brag, but wouldn't you? I'm Miles Galloway, and that was the story of the White Stripes' Seven Nation Army on Encore, with new episodes every Thursday.
Encore is an iHeartRadio Canada podcast. Subscribe to this podcast on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts. Download the iHeartRadio app for more great podcasts just like these.